Whoa, 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 let me make sure I have everything first. Sunglasses check, hat check, Pepsi check, vape check, notes check, thick skin check, and sources check. Man, let's go. Welcome back to Golden Bluted, everybody. If you're a college football fan, you already know what to do. Hit the like and subscribe button because that's all we do. Golden Bluted is still rolling well past 9,000 subscribers, but we have a goal of 10,000 subscribers by the kickoff of the Backyard Brawl. That is September 1st. I know we can do it, but we can't do it without you hitting the subscribe button. There's one thing for sure that's true about the Big 12, and that's a very competitive league. That's a good thing because it's very entertaining, but it's also a bad thing because they keep themselves from getting into the playoffs. Last year, Oklahoma State had a chance to get into the playoffs. They had one loss in the regular season, but then they lost the rematch to Baylor in the Big 12 championship game, and they were denied a spot in the playoffs. Can the Big 12 get back to the playoffs this year? Well, first let's look at last year's standings. Oklahoma State finished first in the Big 12 in the regular season, going 12-2, 8-1 in the Big 12. Baylor was second. They finished 12-2, 7-2. Those were the two teams that played in the Big 12 championship, and Baylor beat Oklahoma State. Third was Oklahoma, 11-2, 7-2 in the Big 12. 4, Iowa State, 7-6, 5-4 in the Big 12. 5 was Kansas State, 8-5, 4-5 in the Big 12. 6 was West Virginia, 6-7, 4-5 in the Big 12. 7th was Texas, 5-7, 3-6 in the Big 12. 8th was TCU, 5-7, 3-6 in the Big 12. 9th place was Texas Tech, 7-6, 3-6 in the Big 12. And last place was Kansas, of course, 2-10, 1-8 in the Big 12. They did get a win in the Big 12 against Texas, so that's a successful season for Kansas standards. What about this year? How big of a change do we see in the Big 12 standings, and do they have a shot to make the playoffs? Well, I'm going to start at the bottom from last year's rankings and work my way up, look at their schedule and give you my prediction for each team, then give you my final rankings for the Big 12, and we'll see if the Big 12 has a good chance to get to playoffs this year based on those predictions. Starting at number 10, Kansas. I actually think Kansas is going to be a better team this year. I like their coach, Lance Leopold. I don't think he's building anything special at Kansas, but they're going to win more games this year. Here's a look at their schedule. They do have 6 road trips, so that's tough right there, but I think they get a win against Tennessee Tech. That's an FCS school. I think they get a win against Duke at home. Duke's not going to be very good. That's a winnable game. I think they get a win against TCU at home. I think TCU is going to be very, very bad this year. And then finally, I think they actually get a road win against Texas Tech. So I have Kansas going 4-8, 2-7 in the Big 12. Next up, Texas Tech. They finished 9th last year. Here's a look at their schedule. They have 5 road trips, but I think Texas Tech is going to take a significant step back this year. I do think Joey McGuire was a great hire at Texas Tech, and he will have Texas Tech in the right direction after this year, but there's going to be big time growing pains for Texas Tech this year. I think they beat Murray State at home, who's an FCS team. I think they go on the road and beat TCU because I think TCU is going to be a very, very bad team. And I think they go on the road and beat Iowa State. I think Iowa State is another team that takes a significant step back this year. So I have Texas Tech going 3-9, 2-7 in the Big 12. Next up, TCU. They finished 8th last year. I think TCU has a historically bad year this year. Gary Patterson was fired last year. Gary Patterson was TCU. He was there for a very, very long time. Big time growing pains at TCU. Their schedule doesn't do them any favors. 6 road trips. I think they beat Tarleton State, which is an FCS team, at home, and maybe they can go on the road to SMU and beat the Mustangs. Other than that, I don't think TCU has any more wins on their schedule. They start off the season on their road to Colorado. That might be considered an upset win for Colorado, but I think Colorado does beat TCU. I have them losing to Oklahoma at home, at Kansas, Oklahoma State at home, Kansas State at home, at West Virginia, Texas Tech at home, at Texas, at Baylor, and Iowa State at home. So 2-10, 0-9 in the Big 12. You think Kansas was bad last year? TCU could be even worse this year. Next up is Texas. They finished 7th last year in the Big 12. I think Texas improves this year. Texas has a lot of talent. I think Steve Sarkisian starts to figure things out in Texas. So here's a look at their schedule. Not all that bad. You get 4 road trips, so not very many road trips. I know they have the neutral site against Oklahoma, but I think they get a win against UL Monroe at home, UTSA at home, at Texas Tech, West Virginia at home. I think they beat Oklahoma in Dallas, Iowa State at home, TCU at home, and at Kansas. So I have Texas losing to Alabama at home. I have them losing at Oklahoma State, at Kansas State, and then they lose to Baylor to end the season. So I have Texas going 8-4, 6-3 in the Big 12. That is a much better year than what they had last year. Next up is West Virginia. They finished 6th 6 last year. West Virginia made a lot of improvements this offseason. Got a great offensive coordinator, Graham Harrell, and that attracted JT Daniels, a great quarterback transfer out of Georgia. And I think their schedule sets up decent. They do have 6 road trips, but they aren't all that difficult. 2 of those road trips come out of conference. I think West Virginia is set up to have a really good season. So I'm basing this prediction on JT Daniels staying healthy. If he gets injured and has to sit out a significant amount of this schedule, then this prediction is going to look a little bit different. So I think West Virginia goes on the road and beats Pitt in the backyard brawl, beats Kansas at home, beats FCS Towson at home, goes on the road and beats Virginia Tech, beats Baylor at home coming off a bye week, goes on the road and beats Texas Tech, beats TCU at home, on the road to Iowa State, beats Oklahoma State at home, beats Kansas State at home. So their only 2 losses that I have, if JT Daniels stays healthy, is at Texas. I just don't like where that's placed. It's coming off a road trip to Virginia Tech where I do have West Virginia winning, and then the last game of the year where they lose to Oklahoma State. So I have West Virginia going 10-2, 7-2 in the Big 12. I know, that's a homer pick, but that's if JT Daniels stays healthy. Next up is Kansas State. They finished 5th in the Big 12 last year. I think Kansas State is a sleeper to win the Big 12 this year. Here's how their schedule sets up. There's 5 road trips on their schedule. A few of them are tough, especially there at the end of the year, but I think they beat FCS South Dakota at home, Missouri at home, Tulane at home, Texas Tech at home, on the road to Iowa State, on the road to TCU, Oklahoma State at home, and Texas at home, and Kansas at home. So I have them losing on the road to Oklahoma, on the road to Baylor, and on the road to West Virginia. I have Kansas State going 9-3, 6-3 in the Big 12. Much improved, and if they can pull off an upset or 2 on the road, Kansas State could most definitely be a challenger for the Big 12 title. Next up is Iowa State. They finished 4th last year. I think Iowa State takes a significant step back this year. They lose Brock Purdy and Breece Hall. That was basically their offense, and they didn't have a very good defense. Here's what their schedule looks like. They only have 4 road trips, so that helps, but I still think they have a bad year. I think they beat Southeast Missouri, who's an FCS team. That's a home game. I think they beat Ohio at home. I think they go on the road and beat Kansas. I think they end the year with the win against TCU at home, but I think they lose at Iowa, Baylor at home, Kansas State at home, at Texas, Oklahoma at home, West Virginia at home, at Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech at home. Ames, Iowa isn't going to have the home field advantage that it usually has this year. I have Iowa State going 4-8, 2-7 in the Big 12. Next up is Oklahoma. They finished 3rd last year. This is a pretty tough schedule with 5 road trips, and the out of conference isn't exactly a cakewalk. They have new head coach Brent Venables. I think he's the future of Oklahoma. He's going to be a very good coach at Oklahoma, but there will be some growing pains, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But I think they beat UTEP at home, Kent State at home, Kansas State at home, at TCU, Kansas at home, at Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and at Texas Tech. So I have Oklahoma losing on the road to Nebraska. That's a rivalry game, and I think Nebraska's going to be much better this year. Last year, Oklahoma barely beat Nebraska at home. I think Oklahoma loses the Red River rivalry this year in Dallas. Maybe they should have lost it last year, but they came from behind and beat Texas. I think Texas is better this year, and I think Texas beats Oklahoma. I also think they lose to Baylor at home. Baylor's going to be a really good team, and I think they lose the road trip to West Virginia. So I think Oklahoma goes 8-4, 6-3 in the Big 12. Yes, that's a down year for Oklahoma, but Brent Venables will get things rolling in Oklahoma. They will be back. Next up is Baylor. Last year, they finished 2nd in the Big 12 in the regular season. They won the Big 12 championship game. Here's how their schedule sets up. They do have 6 road trips, but I think Baylor's going to be a really, really good team, maybe even better than last year. So I think they beat FCS Albany at home. I think they go on the road and beat BYU, and that's going to give Baylor a lot of confidence. I think they beat Texas State at home. I think they beat Iowa State on the road. I think they beat Oklahoma State at home. I think they beat Kansas at home. I think they go on the road and beat Texas Tech, on the road and beat Oklahoma. I think they beat Kansas State at home, TCU at home, and on the road to Texas. So yes, I have Baylor going 11-1, 8-1 in the Big 12. Maybe they have a shot to get to the playoffs if they win the Big 12 championship game. And finally, Oklahoma State. They finished number 1 last year in the regular season, but lost to Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. Here's what their schedule looks like. They have 5 road trips and some pretty tough ones on there. I think losing Mike Knowles to Ohio State is going to hurt Oklahoma State, and they lost a few key defenders on that defense. So I do think Oklahoma State takes a step back. But how big of a step back? Well, I think they beat Central Michigan at home, Arizona State at home, FCS Arkansas Pine Bluff at home. I think they beat Texas Tech at home, on the road to TCU. I think they beat Texas at home. I think they beat Kansas on the road, Iowa State at home, and West Virginia at home. So Oklahoma State's 3 losses: on the road to Baylor, on the road to Kansas State, and on the road to Oklahoma. So I have all 3 of their losses coming on the road. So maybe if they can pull off an upset or 2 on the road, they can have a better record than what I'm projecting. But I'm projecting Oklahoma State to go 9-3, 6-3 in the Big 12. Slight step back from last year, but still a pretty good season. So here's my final rankings for the Big 12 in 2022. Number 10 is where I have TCU. I think they're going to have a very, very bad season. 2-10, 0-9 in the Big 12. They dropped 2 spots from last year. I think number 9 actually stays the same with Texas Tech, but they do have a worse year. 3-9, 2-7 in the Big 12. Number 8, I actually have Kansas jumping up 2 spots. They finished 4-8, 2-7 in the Big 12. That might be considered a successful season for Kansas. Number 7 is where I have Iowa State finishing 4-8, 2-7 in the Big 12. So that's down 3 spots from last year. Number 6 is where I have Oklahoma finishing 8-4, 6-3 in the Big 12. That's down 3 spots from last year. No, number 6 sounds really, really bad, but 8-4 is not that bad, and Oklahoma will rebound in the future. Number 5 is where I have Texas. I also have them going 8-4, 6-3 in the Big 12, but the tiebreaker over Oklahoma. That's up 2 spots from last year. Number 4, this is where I have Oklahoma State falling to, finishing 9-3, 6-3 in the Big 12, so that's down 3 spots from last year. Number 3, this is where I have Kansas State, up 2 spots. I have them finishing 9-3, 6-3 in the Big 12. With that tiebreaker over Oklahoma State, that puts them 1 spot over the Cowboys. Number 2, I know, this looks like a complete homer pick, but this is where I have West Virginia finishing. That's up 5 spots. I have them finishing 10-2, 7-2 in the Big 12, and that's if JT Daniels stays healthy. Coming in at number 1, up 1 spot from last year as far as the regular season, and that's Baylor, going 11-1, 8-1 in the Big 12. Their only loss coming to West Virginia, but if this pans out, they will get their rematch against West Virginia in the Big 12 championship, and if Baylor does beat West Virginia, I think they can get into the playoffs, and it's very, very difficult to beat a really good team twice in the same season. So I think West Virginia beats Baylor in the regular season, but loses to Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. So overall, I have Baylor finishing 12-1, 9-1 in the Big 12 if you count the Big 12 championship. West Virginia finishing 10-3, 7-3 in the Big 12, counting the Big 12 championship game. Let me know in the comments section how crazy you think I am for this Big 12 prediction for 2022. I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this one. That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.